Welcome. The topic for today is Lechem Mishneh. Lechem Mishneh. How do we properly fulfill our obligation of having 2 challah breads for each Shabbos meal? The prophet Yeshayahu says, V'karosu l'Shabbos oinig, and you shall call the day of Shabbos a day of pleasure. According to the Torah, all the day of Shabbos requires is that we announce it at the time of its coming, and that we refrain from 39 prohibited acts. But comes the prophet and says, V'karosu l'Shabbos oinig, if you want to have the full experience of Shabbos, Shabbos is the day of the soul. The only way that you can have the full experience is if you also have physical pleasure. So we try on Shabbos to have all types of permissible physical pleasures in order that we should be able to have the full experience of Shabbos. Based on this, so we have Shabbos meals. We eat 3 meals on Shabbos, and the meal is required to be based around bread. In the times of old, people would normally eat mostly bread. The staff of food was bread. And so therefore, a meal according to the halacha is defined as eating bread. So now we have 3 meals on Shabbos. We eat bread, and customarily, the breads are made whole in order to respect the Shabbos. Out of respect of Shabbos, we make whole breads. They developed a custom over many years that women would actually bake bread special for Shabbos. Once you bake a bread, we know there's a mitzvah in the Torah whenever you have dough to take challah. And so therefore, the breads on Shabbos started to become called challahs. The mitzvah from the Torah to take challah applies when we prepare these breads, and the breads are necessary for the meals on Shabbos. And so the special bread that we eat is called challahs. But the requirement of how many challahs we need for each meal is actually 2. How do we fulfill that requirement halachically? And that's what we wanted to go over today. This is called Lechem Mishneh. Why is there such a requirement? The Torah says in Parshas Beshalach, Vayihi bayom hashishi, and it was on the day of Friday, Laktu Lechem Mishneh, they received a double portion. When the Jewish people were in the desert, God gave the Jewish people special manna bread every day for 40 years. What was the quality of this manna bread? It had the special quality that a person was able to taste anything he would think of. It was a spiritual type of food. It fell to the Israel camp every day. Vayhi bayom hashishi laktu lechem mishneh. Every day, 1 portion fell for each person. But on the day of Friday, laktu lechem mishneh, the people went out and they found that they had a double portion. Why? Vayavo nisiya ida v'gidu Moshe. They came and told Moshe Rabbeinu, we found a double portion. Said Moshe to them, Re'u ki Hashem nosan lechem es Shabbos. God has given you the special day of Shabbos. Al keinu noisin lechem bayom hashishi lechem yomayim. That's why he gives you a double portion on Friday. The double portion represents the special levels that we will merit on the days of Shabbos. The double portion represents the special merit that we will be able to experience on the day of Shabbos. And so, since we have meals, 3 meals on Shabbos, there's a requirement halachically to have 2 challah breads in order to be reminiscent of the manna bread in the desert. But before we get to the actual halachas of how to fulfill this requirement, what I wanted to do is just share a short story about how important it is when we actually fulfill the requirements of the challah bread. About 400 years ago, when the great mystic, the Arizal, was alive in Sifas, in Eretz Yisrael, there lives a simple Jew. This simple Jew went to shul one day, and he heard a beautiful drasha. He heard a beautiful discourse. And the rabbi was talking about the special mitzvah of the challah in the time of the temple, in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. What was the special mitzvah of the challah? The Torah tells us that there was a special table that held the challah in the Beis HaMikdash. On that table were placed 12 challahs every week. Once a week, on Shabbos morning, those 12 challahs were switched. Fresh challahs were baked before Shabbos, of course, on Friday, and they were specifically switched on Shabbos morning with the challahs that were put there a week before. The Gemara says there was an amazing miracle that took place with the challahs. Even a week later, when they were taken off the table, they were just as fresh and warm as if they had been freshly baked. Even though there was no electricity, there was no type of warming element on the special table in the Beis HaMikdash, the challahs were fresh and warm 1 week later. So the rabbi was talking about this, and he was saying what an amazing mitzvah was the 12 challahs that the Kohanim would bring to Hashem. And this simple man went home, and he was so excited. He told his wife, who was also quite a simple thinker, we're going to do this mitzvah for Hashem. And he brought home a few bags of flour, and sure enough, on Friday morning, his wife went and baked 12 beautiful, fresh, scent-filled challahs. On early Friday afternoon, the man filled his cart with the 12 challahs and went to the local shul. He came to the shul. He went up to the Torah Ark. He opened the Torah Ark and put in the challahs that him and his wife had made special for God. He closed the Ark and went back home. He came Friday night to the prayers, but we don't open the Ark on Friday night. And then he came back Shabbos in the morning. Shabbos in the morning, it came that special moment when they were going to take out the Torah from the Ark. And the man sitting from his place was waiting every second. Are the challahs still going to be there? When they opened the Ark, he saw, wow, there's no challahs. God must have taken them. God took our sacrifice. God took what we brought for him, our present. He was ecstatic. He went back home after the prayers and he told his wife, you wouldn't believe this. God accepted our present. And they were both so excited. They went the next week. Sure enough, Friday morning, his wife baked 12 challahs. Early Friday afternoon, the man took the challahs. Again, went up to the Aron Kodesh, went up to the Torah Ark, and put in the 12 challahs. Next day, Shabbos morning, again, same thing. He saw there were no challahs there. Even more excited. And this went on for quite a while, maybe a couple of months. One Friday afternoon, it came out that the Gabbai, the Shamish in the shul, came a little early. He walks into the shul, and he sees that a man is standing with a cart next to the Aron Kodesh, next to the Torah Ark. He goes up to him and says, what are you doing? He said, I'm bringing the challahs. He said, bring the challahs? For who? He said, I'm bringing the challahs for God. He said, really? He said, yeah. Every Friday I do this. My wife bakes the 12 challahs. I bring it Friday afternoon. I put it into the Aron Kodesh. Says the Shamish, well, why would you do this? He says, because God loves our present. He said, really? He said, yeah. Well, how do you know? He says, God accepts our present every week. He says, how do you know God accepts your present? He said, because I come Shabbos morning and I see that the challahs are not here anymore. God accepts our present each and every week. And the Shamish started to get angry at him. And he said, What do you think? You think God comes down and just takes the challah? I was the one who was taking it. What type of fool puts challah in the Aron Kodesh? What are you doing? Get out of here. And the man was totally broken. There were no words to describe how despondent he was. Shortly after Shabbos, the great mystic sent to have the Rabbi called to his house. The Rabbi arrived at his house. Sit down. I have some unfortunate news for you. It has been revealed to me in a heavenly way that you need to receive a very difficult punishment. The Rabbi said, What? What did I do? He said there was a simple man, and he was bringing the challah every Friday, and you stopped him from bringing the challah. He said, well, yeah, I did, but of course I stopped him. Who puts challah in Aron Kodesh? Said the great Arizal, it was revealed to me in a heavenly way that God has not had such pleasure from service that was done before him since the time of the temple as he had from this simple couple who brought him the challah. And you stopped that. It's been decreed that you receive a terrible punishment. And unfortunately, within a couple of weeks, the Rabbi did receive some terrible punishment. We see from this story how important our simple acts are to God. It seems to us, when we come on Shabbos night and we make the bracha on the challah, what difference does it make? It's whole, it's not whole, it's fresh, it's not fresh. One small act done with total sincerity is what God is looking for. Our small acts, even today, long after the time of the destruction of the temple, can bring God just as much pleasure as he had back in those days of the temple. And so there are actually some people that when they make the challahs for Friday night and Shabbos, even though we only need 2, they try to make it in some way that it should be like 12. Some people actually make 12 small challahs, but others, they knead the dough in such a way where they use 6 strands of challah dough, and they make it all, they braid it all into one challah. So one challah has 6 strands, the second challah has 6 strands, and that's the way our challahs hint to the 12 challahs in the Beis HaMikdash. So we have a requirement to have 2 challahs every Shabbos. Now we wanted to get to the halachic aspect of how to actually fulfill this requirement. The first rule in regard to the 2 challahs is that the challahs must be complete. They need to be whole. And so therefore, if a person was baking challahs and part of the challah got stuck to the pan, wouldn't be able to use it. Sometimes 2 challahs got stuck together, they need to be separated. If it's a majority of the challah that's stuck together, if it's in the length, the entire challah, the entire length of the challah is stuck together, probably not considered whole. We need anything that's baked, that's a whole item. It could be even a whole matzah. If you have a matzah from Pesach, that's a whole matzah. It could be a machine-made matzah, but it needs to be whole, not chipped. We can even use a bagel. A bagel, ironically, is made with a hole. But since that's the way it's supposed to be made, it's considered whole. A pita bread. Whatever we use should be whole out of respect of the Shabbos. Secondly, when we put the challahs on the table on Friday night of Shabbos morning, customarily they need to be covered. We take a special covering and we cover the challahs. If a person doesn't have a special covering, you could use even some napkins. Why do we cover the challahs? Because remember, the challah bread is reminiscent of the special manna bread. The manna bread that fell in the desert for the Jewish people, we're told, came almost gift wrapped, so to speak. Underneath the manna bread came a layer of dew. On top of that fell the manna bread, and on top of that fell another layer of dew, which means that when the people came to take the manna bread for themselves, it was almost as if wrapped, fresh packed to contain the freshness. And so therefore, obviously on a spiritual level, it didn't have to contain the freshness, but God gave us the feel of how special we are and gave us that special covering even above the manna. And so therefore, when it comes Shabbos, and we have the challahs that represent the manna bread, we put a covering underneath. That's the tablecloth. We place the challahs on that, and we put a covering on top of the challahs. The third thing is when we come to actually make the brach, when we make the blessing on the challahs, it's required according to the halacha to actually hold them. We put our hands underneath the cover, we hold both challahs with our 10 fingers. And then when we come to the bracha, we lift up the challahs slightly. Some people lift it up by the name of by the mention of Hashem's name. Some people lift it up by the end of the bracha, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. We lift up slightly underneath the cover the 2 challahs. Lastly, if a person is making the bracha for other people, there are other people sitting at his table, he should have in mind that he wants to make the bracha collectively for everyone present. We know that the rule in halacha is one person can make a bracha for everyone else. In regard to a mitzvah, one person can make a bracha for everyone else, but the person making the bracha has to have in mind that they're making it on behalf of everyone, and everyone who's listening needs to have in mind that they want to fulfill their obligation of the blessing by listening to the blessing of the person who's making it. So, the person who's at the head of the table puts his hands on the challah, lifts up the challah, is making the blessing for everyone. He should have in mind that he wants to make the blessing for the purpose of everyone. Right afterwards, he's the one who should eat first. He should eat first before giving out the challah to everyone else. So we'll go over what we learned today. In order to fulfill this requirement, the challahs need to be whole. It could be a whole challah bread, a whole loaf of bread, pita bread, or a matzah. Secondly, the challahs need to be covered. That means that when we put them on the table, initially they're covered. Thirdly, when we come to make the bracha, we hold the challah with all our 10 fingers, lift it up slightly, and then, finally, when we make the bracha, we have in mind to fulfill the obligation of all those who are seated with us, and the person who's making the blessing tastes first and then gives out to everyone else. May God help. And in the merit of these seemingly small acts that we do today, in the merit of having 2 challahs for each meal on Shabbos and doing it properly, may we merit that level to enjoy the Shabbos, in its intrinsic spiritual nature, and ultimately to enjoy the spiritual pleasures of the Shabbos of the future speedily in our days.